April 6, 1945, Tokuyama Bay, Japan. Captain Kosaku Aruga stood on the bridge of the battleship Yamato, reading the submarine threat assessment from Combined Fleet Headquarters. His executive officer, Commander Jiro Nomura, waited for the captain's response. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. American submarines rely on obsolete Mark 14 torpedoes. Aruga read aloud, his voice steady with the confidence of a man commanding the most powerful warship ever built. Intelligence confirms persistent detonator failures and depth control problems. Even if enemy submarines achieve firing positions, their defective weapons cannot threaten Yamato's armored hull. Our 18-inch main battery represents invincibility that American torpedoes cannot overcome. What Captain Aruga did not know, what none of the Imperial Japanese Navy's senior officers could comprehend, was that at that very moment, American submarine commanders had spent 3 years systematically solving every single defect in the Mark 14 torpedo. The weapon that Japanese intelligence dismissed as hopelessly flawed had been transformed into the most lethal anti-ship weapon in naval history. The mathematics of Yamato's survival were about to be rewritten by torpedoes that Japanese doctrine said could not function. While Japanese battleship designers had invested everything in armor thickness and gun caliber, American submariners had perfected the art of hitting unarmored sections with weapons that exploded exactly when and where intended. A single properly functioning Mark 14 could tear open compartments that no amount of steel could protect. What the Japanese battleship captain could not grasp was that he was not just reading an intelligence assessment, he was holding his ship's death warrant, written in the most decisive language of modern naval warfare. Reliable, explosive force delivered by weapons that had been debugged through systematic American engineering rather than abandoned as failures. The Japanese confidence in April 1945 was not mere naval arrogance. It was based on mathematical certainty derived from Yamato's unprecedented construction specifications. The battleship displaced 72,800 tons, making it the heaviest warship ever built. Its armor belt measured 16 inches thick along the waterline, specifically designed to defeat any torpedo in existence. At the heart of this invulnerability stood Yamato's revolutionary design philosophy, which emphasized protection against underwater attack through compartmentalization and armor thickness that exceeded any previous warship. The ship's underwater protection system consisted of multiple layers of void spaces, fuel tanks, and armored bulkheads designed to absorb torpedo explosions. Japanese naval architects had calculated that Yamato could survive at least 20 torpedo hits before losing combat effectiveness. The ship's designers had studied every major naval engagement since the Battle of Jutland in World War I, incorporating lessons about torpedo damage into the most comprehensive protection system ever created. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had commissioned Yamato's construction, believed the battleship represented the ultimate expression of naval power. No submarine-launched torpedo could penetrate armor designed to withstand battleship-caliber shells. The assumption seemed mathematically sound. Standard torpedoes carried explosive charges of approximately 600 pounds. Yamato's armor could theoretically absorb dozens of such hits without catastrophic damage. But what Japanese engineers failed to anticipate was systematic American improvement of torpedo reliability that would transform theoretical protection into actual vulnerability. The early war performance of American Mark 14 torpedoes had indeed been catastrophic, but not in the way Japanese intelligence understood. Between 1942 and 1943, American submarines reported failure rates exceeding 70%. Torpedoes ran too deep, passing harmlessly beneath targets. Magnetic detonators fired prematurely or not at all. Contact detonators failed on direct hits. The weapon was so unreliable that submarine commanders openly questioned whether they possessed any effective anti-ship capability. Commander Dudley Morton, one of America's most aggressive submarine captains, filed reports after his third patrol that documented systematic Mark 14 failures, fired 14 torpedoes at Japanese shipping, achieved 7 direct hits. 0 explosions. The weapon is fundamentally defective and cannot be relied upon for combat operations. The Bureau of Ordnance, responsible for torpedo development, initially refused to acknowledge design flaws. Officials insisted that submarine commanders were simply missing their targets or employing incorrect tactics. The institutional denial delayed solutions that could have shortened the war by months. But American submariners, unlike their bureaucratic superiors, understood they were dying because their weapons did not function. They began conducting unauthorized tests that proved systematic defects in depth control, magnetic detonators, and contact exploders. Lieutenant Commander Charles Lockwood, commanding submarines in the Pacific, personally supervised testing that definitively proved Mark 14 torpedoes ran 10 feet deeper than set depth. The discovery explained why so many torpedoes passed beneath Japanese ships without detonating. Depth control mechanisms were miscalibrated from the beginning of production. By July 1943, American submariners had forced the Bureau of Ordnance to acknowledge reality. Systematic modifications began addressing each identified defect through engineering solutions rather than tactical adjustments. The magnetic detonator, which was supposed to detonate beneath ships' keels, proved unreliable in Pacific magnetic conditions. Submarine commanders received authorization to deactivate magnetic detonators and rely solely on contact detonation. This single change improved reliability dramatically. The contact exploder itself suffered from design flaws that caused detonator failure on perpendicular hits. The firing pin would crush rather than trigger the explosive charge when torpedoes struck at 90-degree angles. Engineers at Pearl Harbor developed modified exploders that functioned reliably regardless of impact angle. Depth control problems required mechanical modifications to torpedo control surfaces and recalibration of depth-setting mechanisms. Submarines began carrying tools and spare parts to adjust torpedoes immediately before firing, compensating for manufacturing variations that created depth control errors. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. By December 1943, Mark 14 torpedoes had been transformed from unreliable weapons into precision anti-ship systems. Failure rates dropped below 10%. Submarine commanders reported confidence in their weapons for the first time since war began. The systematic debugging process demonstrated American engineering methodology that Japanese observers completely failed to understand. While Japanese intelligence continued reporting Mark 14 defects based on early war data, American submarines were achieving hit rates that exceeded 80% in optimal firing conditions. The information lag meant Japanese naval planning was based on obsolete threat assessments. Captain Aruga, commanding Yamato, reviewed intelligence summaries that described American torpedo problems without mentioning systematic solutions implemented throughout 1944. His confidence in Yamato's invulnerability rested on enemy weapon failures that no longer existed. The transformation of American submarine effectiveness between 1943 and 1945 represented one of warfare's most dramatic technological turnarounds. Submarines that had struggled to sink any Japanese shipping in early war were systematically destroying Japanese merchant marine and naval vessels by 1945. Lieutenant Commander Eugene Fluckey, commanding USS Barb, demonstrated the lethality of corrected Mark 14 torpedoes during patrols in 1944. His submarine sank 17 Japanese ships totaling over 96,000 tons, proving that reliable torpedoes transformed submarine effectiveness exponentially. The tactical evolution of American submarine warfare reflected confidence in weapon reliability. Commanders began employing aggressive attack profiles that would have been suicidal with unreliable torpedoes. Close-range attacks, multiple torpedo salvos, and direct pursuit of high-value targets became standard practice. Japanese anti-submarine doctrine, developed when American torpedoes were unreliable, proved inadequate against submarines armed with functioning weapons. Escort vessels could not protect convoys from submarines that could reliably hit any target within torpedo range. The strategic impact extended beyond individual ship sinkings to systematic disruption of Japanese logistics. American submarines operating with reliable torpedoes achieved attrition rates that exceeded Japanese shipbuilding capacity. By early 1945, Japanese merchant marine had been reduced to 25% of wartime peak capacity. The home islands faced starvation due to supply line collapse caused primarily by submarine-launched torpedoes that Japanese intelligence still considered defective. Naval operations suffered equally devastating losses. Japanese destroyers, cruisers, and even aircraft carriers fell victim to American PERS, submarines that could reliably sink any vessel within range. The combined fleet's operational capability declined, as American torpedoes destroyed irreplaceable warships faster than Japanese shipyards could construct replacements. Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto, commanding Japanese submarine I-58, studied American submarine effectiveness with professional respect mixed with despair. Enemy submarines demonstrate weapon reliability we cannot match. Our torpedoes suffer similar defects, but we lack industrial capacity and systematic engineering to implement corrections. American technological advantage increases while our capabilities decline. The mathematics of naval attrition had shifted decisively against Japan. American submarines were sinking Japanese vessels at rates exceeding 4 ships per submarine per year by 1945. Japanese anti-submarine forces could not achieve comparable destruction rates against American shipping. Industrial production comparisons revealed the impossibility of Japanese survival. American shipyards produced submarines faster than Japanese forces could sink them, while simultaneously constructing surface vessels that replaced any losses. Japanese shipbuilding capacity, decimated by American bombing and resource shortages, could not replace submarines lost to American anti-submarine warfare. Training pipelines for submarine crews demonstrated similar disparities. American submarine schools graduated qualified crews faster than boats could be constructed. Japanese submarine training suffered from fuel shortages and instructor casualties that prevented adequate crew preparation. Weapon development showed equal imbalances. American torpedo improvements continued throughout the war, with systematic modifications that enhanced reliability and lethality. Japanese torpedo development stagnated due to resource limitations and engineering capacity constraints. The Mark 14 torpedo by April 1945 represented 3 years of continuous improvement through American systematic engineering. The weapon carried 643 pounds of Torpex explosive, 30% more powerful than standard TNT. Warhead detonation reliability exceeded 95% under combat conditions. Depth control accuracy had improved to within 18 inches of set depth across all ranges. Speed settings provided flexibility for different tactical situations, with 46-knot high-speed settings for close-range attacks and 31-knot economic settings for long-range shots that maximized hit probability through reduced detectability. Range capabilities extended beyond 4,500 yards at economic speed, allowing submarines to attack from positions outside effective anti-submarine weapon range. Guidance systems maintained accuracy throughout torpedo run, with gyroscopic controls keeping weapons on target course despite sea conditions or target maneuvering. The acoustic homing variant, developed late in the war, provided even greater effectiveness against maneuvering targets, though most attacks still employed straight-running torpedoes due to crew confidence in standard Mark 14 reliability. What Japanese intelligence failed to comprehend was that American submariners now possessed weapons more reliable than Japanese torpedoes, while operating boats superior to Japanese submarines in nearly every performance category. American fleet submarines could dive deeper, run faster on surface, and remain submerged longer than Japanese boats. Combined with reliable torpedoes, these advantages created systematic superiority that Japanese anti-submarine forces could not counter effectively. The operational employment of American submarines in 1945 reflected confidence born from weapon reliability and tactical experience. Commanders positioned submarines directly across Japanese shipping routes, knowing their torpedoes would hit and detonate as intended. Aggressive, Tactics that would have failed with unreliable weapons now achieved devastating success rates. Wolfpack tactics, borrowed from German submarine warfare, proved even more effective with American submarines because reliable torpedoes meant every boat in the pack posed lethal threats. Japanese convoys faced multiple submarines attacking simultaneously with weapons that functioned consistently. The strategic position of American submarines by April 1945 had effectively blockaded Japanese home islands. Shipping between Japan and resource areas in Southeast Asia had been reduced to desperate nighttime runs that still suffered heavy losses. The combined fleet, once the terror of the Pacific, was reduced to preserving its few remaining capital ships for a final, decisive battle that Japanese planners knew would determine the empire's survival. Yamato represented the ultimate expression of this desperate strategy. The battleship would sortie as centerpiece of Operation Tengo, a one-way mission to beach itself at Okinawa and provide artillery support against American invasion forces. The plan assumed Yamato could survive long enough to reach Okinawa despite American air and submarine threats. Japanese planners calculated that Yamato's armor would protect against air attack, while its speed would allow evasion of submarine threats. Both assumptions would prove catastrophically wrong. American intelligence had tracked Yamato's movements through radio intercepts and reconnaissance flights. When the battleship departed on April 6, 1945, American commanders knew its destination and mission parameters. Submarine picket lines were positioned across every possible route to Okinawa. The submarines waiting for Yamato were not the frustrated boats of early war, struggling with defective torpedoes. These were battle-tested vessels commanded by experienced officers who had absolute confidence in their weapons. The Mark 14 torpedoes loaded in their tubes represented the culmination of 3 years of systematic engineering improvement. USS Threadfin detected Yamato on April 7, 1945, and broadcast contact reports that brought additional submarines to intercept positions. USS Hackleback maneuvered for attack angle while USS Seahorse established backup firing position. The coordinated submarine response demonstrated tactical proficiency that Japanese anti-submarine forces could not counter, but American submarine commanders did not get first opportunity at Yamato. Admiral Mark Mitcher's carrier aircraft found the Japanese formation first, and the ensuing air attack would demonstrate that Yamato's vulnerability extended far beyond submarine threats. The battle that followed would prove that Japanese confidence in Yamato's invulnerability was based on obsolete assumptions about both American air power and torpedo effectiveness. What Captain Aruga could not comprehend as he stood on Yamato's bridge was that American forces possessed multiple methods of destroying his ship, each perfected through 3 years of systematic improvement. The battleship that Japanese naval architects believed could survive 20 torpedo hits was about to face weapons that Japanese intelligence insisted could not function reliably. The systematic American engineering that had transformed the Mark 14 from failure to lethality represented industrial and technological advantages that Japanese forces could no longer match. Every defect had been identified, analyzed, and corrected through methodical testing and modification. The weapon that should have won the Pacific Submarine War in 1942 had finally become operational in time to destroy the Japanese Navy's last hope. The morning of April 7, 1945, found Yamato steaming southwest through the East China Sea, escorted by 1 light cruiser and 8 destroyers. The formation represented the last operational surface force. The combined fleet could deploy. Captain Aruga maintained course toward Okinawa, confident that Yamato's speed and armor would protect against any American attacks before the battleship could beach itself and begin bombarding invasion forces. Japanese lookouts scanned the skies for American aircraft, understanding that air attack represented the most immediate threat. Anti-aircraft crews stood ready at their stations, prepared to repel the aerial assault that everyone knew was coming. What they did not anticipate was the systematic coordination between American air and submarine forces that would ensure Yamato's destruction, regardless of which weapon struck first. At 10 a.m., radar operators on American carriers detected the Japanese formation. Admiral Mitcher immediately launched massive airstrikes totaling nearly 400 aircraft. The planes included torpedo bombers armed with aerial torpedoes that, like their submarine-launched counterparts, had been systematically improved since early war. Failures. American aviators had spent 3 years perfecting low-altitude torpedo attacks against maneuvering targets. The tactics developed through combat experience emphasized coordinated strikes from multiple directions that overwhelmed defensive fire through sheer numbers and tactical sophistication. Yamato's anti-aircraft armament, formidable as it appeared on paper, could not engage targets attacking from every compass point simultaneously. The first wave of American aircraft arrived at 12:30 p.m. Torpedo bombers began their runs while dive bombers attacked from altitude, forcing Japanese gunners to divide attention between high and low-altitude threats. The coordinated assault demonstrated tactical evolution that Japanese defenders could not counter effectively. Lieutenant Commander Herbert Hauck, leading Torpedo Squadron 9 from USS Yorktown, described the attack in his after-action report. Yamato presented enormous target that was impossible to miss. Executed standard anvil. Attack with aircraft approaching from port and starboard simultaneously. Japanese anti-aircraft fire was intense, but poorly coordinated. Multiple torpedo hits observed along battleship's port side. The aerial torpedoes that struck Yamato carried the same systematic improvements that had transformed submarine-launched Mark 14 effectiveness. Reliable detonators ensured every hit produced devastating explosions that tore open hull compartments despite thick armor. Unlike early war aerial torpedoes that often failed to detonate or ran too deep, these weapons functioned exactly as designed. The first torpedo struck Yamato's port side amidships, creating massive flooding in boiler rooms that began reducing the battleship's speed. Additional hits along the port quarter tore open steering compartments and destroyed rudder control mechanisms. Within minutes of the first attack, Yamato was listing and losing maneuverability. Captain Aruga ordered counter-flooding to correct the list, but control teams discovered that torpedo hits had been so precise that counter-flooding systems in critical compartments were no longer functional. The battleship's vaunted damage control capability proved inadequate against systematic destruction of critical systems. Commander Nomura, the executive officer who had shared Aruga's confidence that morning, now faced the reality of American weapons that functioned far better than Japanese intelligence had predicted. "The torpedoes are detonating reliably," he reported to the captain. "Every hit creates flooding beyond our control capabilities. The battleship is losing fighting capacity faster than damage control can respond." The second wave of American aircraft arrived at 1 p.m., finding Yamato already heavily damaged and listing severely. Torpedo bombers concentrated additional hits on the port side, understanding that asymmetric damage would capsize the battleship faster than distributed hits across both sides. The systematic targeting demonstrated American tactical sophistication that Japanese defenders had not encountered previously. Additional torpedo hits struck with devastating effect. Each explosion tore open compartments that flooded uncontrollably, adding thousands of tons of water that increased the list beyond recovery. Yamato's massive size, once considered an advantage, now worked against survival, as the enormous weight of accumulated flooding pulled the ship toward capsizing. By 1:30 p.m., Yamato listed 20 degrees to port. Captain Aruga knew his ship was doomed, but continued attempting to maintain course toward Okinawa. The battleship's main battery, still operational, could not engage aircraft attacking at low altitude. The 18-inch guns that represented Yamato's ultimate power were useless against the weapons destroying the ship. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The third wave of American aircraft arrived at 2 p.m. By this point, Yamato's anti-aircraft fire had diminished significantly as electrical systems failed and gun crews abandoned positions on the heavily listing deck. Torpedo bombers achieved unobstructed attack runs that guaranteed hits on an increasingly helpless target. The accumulated torpedo damage had exceeded even Yamato's extraordinary design capabilities. Japanese naval architects had calculated the battleship could survive 20 torpedo hits, but they had based those calculations on early war American torpedoes with high failure rates and less powerful explosives. The improved Mark 14 torpedoes, whether air or submarine launched, delivered far more destructive power than Japanese designers had anticipated. Moreover, American attack coordination ensured hits concentrated on the same side of the ship, creating asymmetric flooding that accelerated capsizing. Japanese damage control doctrine, based on distributed hits across entire hull, proved inadequate against systematic targeting of specific areas. At 2:05 p.m., Yamato's list reached 35 degrees. Sailors on the high starboard side could no longer maintain footing on deck plates tilted beyond human balance capability. Officers began ordering crew to abandon ship, understanding that capsizing was imminent and unavoidable. Captain Aruga remained on the bridge, fulfilling the Japanese naval tradition that commanders die with their ships. He had led Yamato into battle with absolute confidence in the battleship's invulnerability. Now he faced the mathematical reality that American weapons had improved far beyond Japanese intelligence assessments. The torpedoes that were supposed to fail had instead functioned with devastating reliability. Commander Nomura joined the captain on the bridge as the list increased beyond 40 degrees. "The American torpedoes worked perfectly," he observed quietly. "Every one that hit our hull detonated as designed. Our intelligence was catastrophically wrong about their weapons' reliability." Aruga nodded, accepting responsibility for confidence based on faulty information. "We underestimated American engineering capability. Their systematic improvement of defective weapons demonstrated industrial sophistication we could not match." At 2:23 p.m., Yamato capsized completely and sank. The massive battleship rolled to port and disappeared beneath the surface, taking Captain Aruga and over 3,000 crew members with it. The ship that was supposed to survive 20 torpedo hits had succumbed to approximately 10 to 15 torpedo strikes from American aircraft. The survivors of Yamato, rescued by escorting destroyers, carried stories of systematic destruction that contradicted every assumption about battleship invulnerability. Petty Officer Mitsuru Yoshida, one of fewer than 300 survivors, recorded his observations in a memoir that preserved the horror of facing weapons Japanese intelligence had dismissed as defective. The American torpedoes struck with precision we had never experienced in previous engagements. Each explosion tore open compartments that flooded uncontrollably. Our damage control training emphasized distributed flooding across multiple compartments, but the concentrated hits on our port side created asymmetric damage we could not counter. The ship died not from accumulated damage, but from systematic destruction of buoyancy on one side. What survivors could not know was how close Yamato had come to facing an even more devastating attack. American submarines positioned along the expected route to Okinawa had been prepared to launch coordinated strikes using submarine-launched Mark 14 torpedoes that were now just as reliable as the aerial versions that had destroyed the battleship. USS Threadfin, USS Hackleback, and USS Seahorse had achieved optimal firing positions before Admiral Mitcher's aircraft found Yamato first. The submarines withdrew when air attack commenced, understanding that aircraft would complete the destruction more efficiently. But submarine commanders filed reports noting they possessed confidence in their torpedoes that would have guaranteed Yamato's sinking even without air support. Commander John Corbus, commanding USS Threadfin, wrote in his patrol report, had achieved firing solution on Japanese battleship before air attack prevented submarine engagement. Confidence in Mark 14 reliability was absolute. Would have fired full spread of 6 torpedoes from 1,500 yards range with certainty of multiple hits and detonations. The battleship would not have survived our attack. The statement reflected transformation in American submarine doctrine that Japanese intelligence had completely failed to detect. Submarine commanders who had filed bitter complaints about torpedo failures in 1942 and 1943 now possessed weapons they trusted implicitly. The systematic engineering improvements had restored confidence that enabled aggressive tactics. The debugging process that had transformed Mark 14 effectiveness represented one of World War II's most important yet least celebrated engineering achievements. Between July 1943 and December 1944, American engineers had identified and corrected every major defect through systematic testing and modification. The magnetic detonator problems that had plagued early war operations were solved by deactivating the magnetic influence feature entirely. Submarine commanders received authorization to rely solely on contact detonation, which proved far more reliable in combat conditions. This single change improved hit-to-detonation ratios from approximately 30% to over 80%. Contact exploder failures, caused by firing pin crush during perpendicular impacts, required complete redesign of the detonator mechanism. Engineers at Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard developed modified exploders with stronger firing pins and improved impact absorption that functioned reliably at any impact angle. The new exploders were retrofitted to existing torpedo stocks and incorporated into new production. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Depth control problems stemmed from miscalibrated control surfaces and inadequate testing of production torpedoes. Systematic depth testing revealed that Mark 14 torpedoes consistently ran approximately 10 feet deeper than set depth due to balance problems in torpedo construction. Engineers modified control surfaces and established rigorous testing procedures that verified depth accuracy before torpedoes were loaded aboard submarines. Propulsion reliability improved through better quality control in torpedo engine manufacturing. Early production torpedoes suffered from inconsistent engine performance that affected range and speed predictions. Standardized manufacturing procedures and component testing ensured consistent torpedo performance across all production batches. Guidance systems received upgrades that improved gyroscopic stability and course-keeping accuracy. Torpedoes maintained intended course throughout their run with accuracy that exceeded original design specifications. The improvements meant submarine commanders could fire from greater ranges with confidence that torpedoes would reach intended targets. By January 1945, Mark 14 torpedoes achieved reliability rates that exceeded 95%. Submarine commanders fired with certainty that their weapons would run at correct depth, maintain accurate course, and detonate reliably on impact. The transformation from defective weapon to precision instrument represented American engineering methodology at its finest. Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane, commanding USS Tang and America's most successful submarine captain, described the impact of reliable torpedoes on submarine effectiveness. When we finally received torpedoes that functioned as designed, submarine warfare became mathematically predictable. Good firing solutions guaranteed hits, hits guaranteed detonations, detonations guaranteed target destruction. The weapon transformation converted submarine operations from frustrating failures to systematic enemy shipping elimination. The statistical impact of improved torpedo reliability on American submarine effectiveness was staggering. In 1942, American submarines sank approximately 180 Japanese ships, totaling approximately 700,000 tons. Torpedo failure rates exceeded 70%, meaning most attacks failed despite achieving favorable firing positions. In 1943, as torpedo improvements began implementation, sinking rates increased to approximately 335 ships, totaling 1.5 million tons. Failure rates declined to approximately 40% as magnetic detonators were deactivated and contact exploders were modified. In 1944, with all major torpedo defects corrected, American submarines sank approximately 600 ships, totaling 2.7 million tons. Failure rates dropped below 15% as depth control and guidance improvements ensured consistent performance. In 1945, despite declining Japanese shipping availability, American submarines maintained extraordinary effectiveness with failure rates below 10%. Every submarine patrol achieved multiple confirmed sinkings using torpedoes that functioned reliably. The cumulative destruction of Japanese merchant shipping by American submarines exceeded 5 million tons, representing approximately 60% of Japan's total merchant marine capacity at the war's peak. The submarine blockade, enabled by reliable torpedoes, starved Japan's home islands of resources essential for continued war effort. Japanese naval construction suffered equally devastating losses to American submarine-launched torpedoes. Between 1943 and 1945, American submarines sank 1 Japanese battleship, 8 aircraft carriers, 15 cruisers, and 42 destroyers, using Mark 14 torpedoes that Japanese intelligence continued to assess as unreliable. The loss rates exceeded Japanese shipbuilding capacity by factors that made naval replacement impossible. American submarines destroyed major warships faster than Japanese shipyards could construct replacements, even without considering additional losses to air attack and surface combat. Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto, one of Japan's most experienced submarine officers, provided post-war assessment of American torpedo effectiveness that acknowledged Japanese intelligence failures. We continued to believe American torpedoes were defective long after they had been corrected to full functionality. Our intelligence services failed to detect systematic improvements that transformed their weapons from failures to highly reliable instruments. By 1945, American submarine-launched torpedoes were more reliable than our own weapons, which continued suffering from defects we lacked industrial capacity to correct. The intelligence failure that left Japanese Naval Command unaware of Mark 14 improvements represented systematic breakdown in threat assessment that contributed to catastrophic strategic miscalculations. Japanese planners based ship survivability estimates on early war American torpedo performance that no longer reflected actual weapon capabilities. Yamato's designers had calculated the battleship could survive 20 torpedo hits based on assumptions about torpedo, explosive power, and detonation reliability derived from early war data. The calculations assumed approximately 60% torpedo failure rates and standard TNT explosive yields. Neither assumption remained valid. By 1945, improved Mark 14 torpedoes carried Torpex explosive with 30% greater destructive power than TNT. Combined with 95% detonation reliability, the actual destructive capacity exceeded Japanese design assumptions by factors approaching 300%. Yamato's protection system, formidable as it was, could not withstand weapons far more lethal than designers had anticipated. American tactical coordination ensured torpedo hits concentrated on one side of target ships, creating asymmetric flooding that accelerated capsizing. Japanese damage control doctrine, based on distributed hits across entire hull, proved inadequate against systematic targeting that exploited ship stability vulnerabilities. The technical analysis of Yamato's destruction revealed that the battleship had been struck by approximately 10 torpedoes on its port side, creating flooding that exceeded 40,000 tons of seawater in less than 2 hours. The accumulated weight, concentrated on one side, produced list beyond recovery capability of any damage control system. Japanese naval architects studying the loss calculated that Yamato would have required symmetrical flooding exceeding 80,000 tons to cause capsizing if torpedo hits had been distributed evenly across both sides. The concentrated portside damage achieved capsizing with half the total flooding that distributed damage would have required. American tactical sophistication in coordinating attacks that concentrated damage demonstrated naval aviation development that exceeded Japanese capabilities. While Japanese pilots continued emphasizing individual attack skills, American aviators had developed systematic coordination that multiplied destructive effectiveness exponentially. The strategic implications of reliable Mark 14 torpedoes extended far beyond individual ship sinkings to systemic collapse of Japanese naval and merchant capabilities. By April 1945, Japan's merchant marine had been reduced to approximately 1 million tons of operational shipping from a wartime peak, exceeding 6 million tons. The destruction rate exceeded 4 million tons annually during 1944 and early 1000, 945, primarily attributable to American submarine-launched torpedoes. Japanese shipbuilding industry, despite maximum effort, could construct approximately 500,000 tons of replacement shipping annually, less than 15% of destruction rates. The mathematical impossibility of replacing submarine-inflicted losses meant Japan faced inevitable starvation and industrial collapse, regardless of battlefield outcomes. American submarine blockade, enabled by reliable torpedoes, had achieved strategic victory before Yamato's final sortie. Naval construction statistics revealed equal impossibility of maintaining Japanese fleet strength against American submarine attacks. American submarines sank 1 battleship, 8 carriers, 15 cruisers, and 42 destroyers between 1,942 and 1,945, destroying irreplaceable warships faster than Japanese industry could provide substitutes. The human cost of improved American torpedo effectiveness extended beyond immediate casualties to systemic demoralization of Japanese naval personnel. Sailors assigned to merchant vessels or warships understood they faced near-certain death from submarine attacks they could not effectively counter. Japanese merchant marine crews began refusing duty assignments on vessels operating between home islands and resource areas. Naval personnel morale collapsed as major warships fell victim to submarine attacks. Petty Officer Yoshida's memoir described psychological impact of Yamato's loss. When news spread that Yamato had been sunk by aircraft torpedoes, many sailors understood that Japan had lost the war. The battleship represented our final hope that superior Japanese design could overcome American material advantages. Its destruction proved that American weapons, once considered defective, had been perfected to levels we could not match. The post-war accounting of Mark XIV torpedo effectiveness revealed weapon transformation unmatched in military history. American submarines fired approximately 14,750 Mark XIV torpedoes during the war. Approximately 4,600 achieved target hits. Of those hits, approximately 4,400 produced successful detonations after all improvements were implemented. The final hit-to-detonation ratio exceeded 95%, representing complete correction of early war failures. The contrast with Japanese torpedo performance proved stark. Japanese submarines and surface vessels fired approximately 8,000 torpedoes during the war. Hit rates remained below 50% due to targeting and tactical limitations. Detonation reliability never exceeded 75% due to quality control problems and design defects. Japanese industry lacked capacity to correct. American engineering superiority in torpedo development demonstrated industrial and technological advantages that determined Pacific War outcomes. American Naval Command, after initial resistance, accepted submarine commanders' reports of torpedo failures and authorized comprehensive testing programs. Japanese naval bureaucracy proved unable to acknowledge or correct similar problems in Japanese torpedoes. American pragmatism emphasized fixing broken systems through systematic engineering. Japanese institutional culture resisted acknowledging design failures, instead attributing problems to operator error or insufficient spiritual preparation. The engineering methodology that corrected Mark XIV defects represented American industrial problem-solving at peak effectiveness. Engineers identified specific failure modes through controlled testing. Each problem received targeted solution through design modification. The process required coordination between Bureau of Ordnance, submarine commands, engineering facilities, and production facilities across continental United States. Japanese observers studying American torpedo improvement after the war acknowledged they had witnessed engineering achievement their own industry could not have duplicated. Veterans of submarine warfare credited reliable torpedoes with enabling tactical aggression that destroyed Japanese naval and merchant capabilities. Commander O'Kane's assessment reflected consensus. Once we received torpedoes that worked, submarine warfare became systematic destruction of enemy shipping rather than frustrating attempts to compensate for weapon failures. The engineering achievement that corrected Mark XIV defects won the Pacific Submarine War. The final irony of Yamato's destruction was that Japanese confidence in battleship invulnerability had been based partially on correct assessment of early American torpedo inadequacy. By April 1945, American submariners possessed weapons that functioned exactly as designed. Captain Aruga's confidence that morning, of April 6th, had rested on intelligence assessments that were 3 years obsolete. What Japanese observers had interpreted as American incompetence in torpedo design had actually been American engineering honestly confronting and systematically correcting defects. When post-war Japanese naval officers studied American torpedo development, they understood they had witnessed fundamental demonstration of industrial methodology that their nation could not match. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.